Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Raising Musos Podcast. This is the podcast designed for parents who have children learning music, and we provide all sorts of practical tips and expert advice on all things music education. If this is the first time you are listening, I give you a very warm welcome and hope you will stick around for this episode and future ones, and you can always listen back to old episodes as well, depending on what kind of information it is that you're looking for. My name is Eliza Borgo, and I actually run a music school in Joondalup, which is a northern suburb of Perth in Western Australia. I've been teaching music for, I would say, a decade or so, and it was just something that I noticed parents of my students didn't seem to, they just were ignorant on a couple of things. They just lacked some knowledge, and so that's the knowledge that I try to bring forward in this podcast for other parents and other families, so that, learning music doesn't have to become a complicated, confusing thing for your family. At my music school, we teach piano, guitar, harp, violin, flute, and voice. Possibly other things in the future, I don't know yet. And I started this podcast in 2025, and I hope it's going to continue for a long time to come. If you have any particular issues that you've noticed with your child's musical journey, questions that you have, anything at all that you think I can address and help you with, I would definitely, love to hear from you. So the best way to get in touch is either on Instagram, so Music Makers Academy is the handle. You can contact me on YouTube just by leaving a comment on this video, or you can just send an email. Our address is hello@musicmakersacademy.com.au. And hopefully we can keep the conversation rolling and have lots more, many more interesting conversations about music education. I do want to have guests on the show at some point. It's just difficult for me to organize with the kind of schedule that I currently have. So until I'm able to delegate some of my students, that is unlikely to happen, but please be patient. So today is a very big topic, but one that I think parents really ought to listen and pay attention to. And I'm answering the question, how do I know if my child is ready to take a music exam? So this is a very important question. It's a very good question. Not just because obviously a music exam is quite a big deal, and you want to obviously have your child take an exam when they're ready, but it's also important because I have found that a lot of parents often push their child to take exams when the child's not ready. I've seen this with my own students, and really it should have been my responsibility to tell them the child's not ready. But this was sort of early in my career, when obviously it's hard sometimes to contradict a parent when they are the ones paying you. So there's a bit of a dilemma for some of us there. So I'm going to talk about sort of why exams are a big deal, what are some signs to look for that your child might be ready to take an exam, and on the flip side, what are some signs that your child is not ready for an exam. So get a bit of both sides so you can make a really informed judgment on your child. And if they are not ready for an exam, it really doesn't matter. I know that some parents love the idea of my child is doing an exam every year, every 6 months, and that's great if that's the case, but you don't have to be ashamed of your child and don't make them feel bad if they're not ready for an exam. Like, progress happens at different rates, and sometimes this is the weird thing about progress. Sometimes it feels like really, really slow, and then at some point everything sort of clicks, and then everything like progresses faster. That's what I've noticed anyway with myself and with some of my students. So you don't have to push your child to be ready for an exam, because if you're just pushing your child too much, or pushing the teacher to push the child into an exam, that will most likely result in compromising like steadier growth. And so what would probably happen is the teacher would have to focus on one thing over another, and so then your child's skills will be all over the place. And maybe I can talk to you a little bit more about that as we go through this episode. Okay, so the first part in this podcast is basically like telling you what music exams are for and whether music exams are actually a good thing to do. I actually do want to get other piano and music teachers on this podcast to talk about this, because the teachers' opinions on this issue of exams is extremely divided. Some teachers love like exams, they think it's a great thing. They basically make all of their students do it. Whereas some teachers are 100% against exams. They think that they're not appropriate, or I will not talk for them, but so there's this massive divide in the music community over the use, the purpose of exams, and even like the content of an exam, the way it's assessed. So there is a lot of discussion within the music community about exams. Now, I'm pretty neutral about it. I actually don't care that much for exams, but I can understand that some of my students and some of my parents do care for exams. So I don't push anyone to take exams. If they don't take exams, I don't care. Like, I don't feel any different about it. But if students do want to take exams and they are actually ready to take an exam, I will do my due diligence and prepare them well for the exam. So the reason you might want your child to take an exam, hopefully it has nothing to do with your own ego. If the only reason you want your child to take an exam is so that you can say in front of all your friends, my child has just done grade 3. Like, that's not a good enough reason. That's just a reason that's all about yourself and not even about your child. So if that is like deep down, if that's the reason you want your child to take an exam, I really urge you to reconsider, because your child is actually probably not going to enjoy preparing for the exam, and they're only going to do it to please you. But there can be advantages to completing an exam. Usually what I tell families who are considering doing an exam is that an exam, there is a structure, and it gives a very clear goal. So, because often when there is no goal, students don't really know like what they're learning for. They don't understand why they have to learn a particular piece. They don't have anything to work towards, and then they're just a little bit lost, I suppose, without any direction. So that exam gives them a clear sense of direction. And usually, because exams obviously they get harder and harder, they have different levels, the fact that a student might be completing an exam 1 year or every 2 years, it gives them this sense of real progress, because they can see that they started at a level 1 and now they're up to like grade 4 or grade 5, and therefore they have made good steady progress. So not only is an exam like fairly structured, but it also gives them a clear goal to focus on. At the completion of an exam, hopefully most students would feel a sense of accomplishment. They have completed a whole level, they can start a new level, it can be exciting, and there's some kind of pride and excitement that goes along with that. And another reason why exams might be a good thing is that it's just another performance experience. And of course, so much of music is about performing in front of others, playing music for somebody else. And so doing an exam is just another such opportunity. I would add to that also that an exam allows a student to receive feedback from a different source. And so if you have had the same teacher for a very long time, or even for not very long, it can be nice to just receive feedback from someone else, because they might be able to spot things that your current teacher hasn't. It gives you clues on things you can improve on in the future, and other things like that. So I think for me that's probably the reason that I think exams, the best reason why I think exams are helpful, is just receiving feedback from another source. So these are some of the reasons why you might be considering enrolling your child in an exam. And so then the question becomes, the question shouldn't be should we do an exam, but is it the right time to take an exam? And so this brings me to the second part of this podcast, which is the signs that your child might be ready. So as I said, very often what I've seen is that parents really push their child to take an exam when the child's not ready. And really the teacher should mention this to the parent and have a discussion. But some things to look for would be that the student can play the technical part of the exam confidently. So these are things like the arpeggios, the scales, the technical exercises, probably even the sight reading if they have to do the sight reading. The student can play all of these things pretty fluently and with control. So that would be one sign, because that is sort of showing you that the student has met the technical requirement for that particular exam level. The second sign is that the student has enough confidence to perform. So it would be beneficial if a student had prior performance experience, whether in a small concert or just some experience playing in front of others, because In an exam situation, often you would be playing to a single person, but you know that you're getting judged when you're playing. So you need to have a certain level of confidence in yourself, in order to perform to a good enough standard in a situation when you are under pressure. So having performance confidence is the second sign that your child might be ready for an exam. The third sign is that your child is internally motivated. And so what that means is they basically do the homework by themselves because they are so invested and interested in what they do. It's very, rather than music being something that is pushed by the parent day in, day out, practice only gets done if the parent is around, like that would be a bit of a red flag. But if the child shows enough interest that they can actually tend to practice by themselves, they take ownership of their learning, things like that, that is a good sign, because it means that when they do start working on the exam, they are likely to put in the work necessary without too much nagging from the parents. And so that would be an ideal situation. And related to that is, they know like what they have to do for the exam, and they actually do want to improve. The fourth sign is that they are open to feedback, and they can actually also adjust to feedback. So of course, when you're preparing for an exam, especially if you want to get an A or a B, you have to be really, you have to have high standards for yourself, and that requires patience, but also the ability to receive feedback from your teacher and then be bothered enough to make any required changes to your playing. So the ability to take on feedback and to change, to be willing to relearn things that if they have been learnt wrong or things like that, that would be a clear indication that they're ready for an exam. The next sign is that they have the time and the capacity for an exam. An exam is a big commitment. Depending on the type of exam that you do, you would at least have to play 3 pieces, sometimes more in the higher grades. If you do what is called a comprehensive exam, you would also have theory to learn, as well as a lot of technical work that have to be memorized. So there is a big commitment in terms of the content that has to be learned, and so that requires a lot of time, and you also have to commit to attending the exam and things like that. So it's a big commitment time-wise, and even like mentally as well. So you need to make sure that your child isn't overwhelmed with a ton of other activities, because then, they are likely to not have enough time to practice, to learn things in a thorough way. So you just have to make sure that your child has the time and the capacity to actually get through the entire exam content. I would also add a 6th and final sign, which is that they have strong reading skills. The only reason I mention this is because traditional music exams rely heavily, and I mean very, very heavily, on the ability to read music. So if reading skills are underdeveloped, you are really going to struggle with learning the repertoire. And so, actually maybe I'll mention this in the next part. But yes, so strong reading skills are essential for traditional music exams. So these were the 6 signs that your child might be ready for an exam. So now I'm going to talk about the signs that they might not be ready. And of course, it's basically the opposite of all the signs that I did mention just now. So like struggling with any foundational techniques, so maybe they have poor posture, their technique is poor, or as I said before, like their reading skills is underdeveloped. That's just not a good place to be. You don't want to push an exam on a child who doesn't have those things to a good, secure level. Just as an example, so students who have underdeveloped reading skills, that usually comes about because they tend to learn songs by ear instead, or by rote. So they have a very good ear, and because of that, that's how they learn the songs, and then they give up reading the music because reading the music is a lot harder for them anyway. And I used to have a student like that who was really, really good at memorizing music because he was really good at memorizing the sounds. But his reading skills were pretty terrible. But every year I had to prepare him for the next exam because that's sort of what his parents wanted him to do. And we would literally spend the whole year on the scales and the songs. So 3 pieces and like a couple of scales, but that would take us the whole year to learn them, just because his reading skills were so underdeveloped that he couldn't go home and learn the notes by himself. I had to be there to show him the notes. So look, obviously I feel a bit embarrassed by that. But you know, that's just how it is. I've learnt my lesson. I would probably never recommend an exam anymore unless those reading skills were there. But obviously you can see that would just make it really hard. So you get stuck playing the same pieces for like a year. And then the readings, so because then I was under the pump to like have the student ready for the exam, I could never actually focus on developing those reading skills because I was like, well, we have to learn the songs. And so I would have to show him the songs, then we would rehearse it so much until he like had it memorized. So first of all, we were reinforcing the skills that he was already good at without ever spending time on developing the skills that he was not good at. And so as he progressed through the grades, sure, his playing might have improved, but his reading skills just stayed at this very elementary level. So that's why if your child is, has a bit of a gap in any of the foundational skills, the exam is just going to make it worse. It's not going to make it better. So if you've noticed that in your child, maybe the teacher has mentioned it, please don't enroll in an exam until that issue is fixed. Another sign that your child is not ready for an exam is that practice is not frequent, not regular, and they also have resistance to lessons. So some families think that if they have a goal, like an exam to work towards, that is suddenly going to motivate them and they will suddenly practice. But the truth is that it's sort of the other way around. The practice routine needs to be there before you think of the exam. It's not the other way around. Because unless the practice routine is there, like even if you're enrolled in the exam, like it's not really going to change any habits. So you need to actually nurture the practice habits first. Once these are in place, your child is practicing regularly, then that would be when you would think of the exam, not the other way around. Another sign that your child is not quite ready for an exam yet is simply performance anxiety. So maybe they're just like very young and playing in front of others really scares them, even if they're older sometimes. they can still, struggle to play in front of others. So performance anxiety, obviously they would sort of struggle to get through the exam in front of someone else, and that might result in like a lower mark, which then is no reflection of the effort that they've put in. It's only a reflection of how nervous they were, and that can be really upsetting for sensitive people. So performance anxiety, there are other ways you can help your child perform in front of others without putting them through an exam. And then finally, another sign that your child's not ready for an exam is sort of their attitude towards music and how serious music is for them. If they just want music to be really fun, like a creative hobby, they enjoy not having like a certain structure, they're quite curious, trying new things, then probably an exam isn't quite the best thing for them just yet. Because as I said before, like a music exam is quite structured. Often the styles of music you can play in an exam are quite limited. So if your child is still unsure of their commitment to music, unsure of the type of music they enjoy playing, then they would probably just get bored preparing for an exam, and this is why you would not enroll them for an exam. So that is basically it for today's podcast. I think I've mentioned everything that I've wanted to mention. So I hope this was helpful. Let me know if, after listening to this podcast, you've changed your mind about music exams for your child. Are you just going to wait a little bit longer till they're a little bit more mature, a little bit wiser, they have a better practice routine? How has this podcast helped you make an informed decision on whether or not you will enroll your child for an exam? Please let me know. I love receiving feedback from everyone and anyone. So anyway, just to conclude this episode for today, so an exam, it's really about maturity, it's about timing, and it's about motivation. And when all of those things are aligned, it can be a really beneficial experience for students. As I said at the start, exams provide a clear goal, a sense of progress, a feeling of accomplishment. But when those elements are missing, and when your child is pushed to take an exam when they're not ready, it's going to feel frustrating, it's going to feel sluggish and slow, and the feelings of progress and accomplishment are going to be missing from the experience. Exams are just one way of measuring progress, but there are tons of other ways of thinking about your child's progress. So you don't have to rely on an exam certificate to give you the confidence that your child's progressing. You would probably be able to witness it yourself by the length of the pieces that they play, the complexity of the songs that they play, their ability to read music by themselves, the ability to play music by ear. So don't let the idea of an exam take over your entire child's musical journey, because exams are, in my opinion, really not necessary at all. And many musicians that you know of today probably never really did exams. I never did piano exams. Doesn't stop me from playing at a grade 8 or more level. So that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to giving you some more interesting advice and insights next week for our next episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will speak to you next time.